How do you get the right people doing the right things right? Our goal here is to get you shifting into a different kind of leader, which is a leader owner, which means that all the results, all of what the business needs to do has to be done through the efforts of others. And your job is to lead them in the process of what to do, how to do the work, and what good looks like. So that gets us back to the question of how do you get the right people doing the right things right? Well, there's 3 pillars to that answer. You need to get everybody on the same page, and that's what strategic direction is about. You need people to understand how they all fit together, and that's the people strategy. And then you need the third column. You need everybody to know how they execute or what their role is in delivering the results of the business. So let's unpack that. The first of those 3 pillars is a strategic direction, and that means having these 4 things in place. What's the vision? What's the big picture? What are we trying to do? Mission is how are we going to get there? Culture, what are the rules of the game? How do we all work together? So that's the strategic part. The people part is how do everybody all fit together? The org chart, everybody knows who's responsible for what, position description, everybody knows what their role in that is. Performance appraisals and performance incentives. So feedback, I know if I'm doing well, I know what I can improve, and my pay in some fashion is tied to performance. Team meeting rhythm means everybody is on the same page and communicating in a systematic, structural way, and that we have an organized way in how we communicate each other. Management strategy is what's the action plan each person in the business needs to know, what part of the strategic plan they're responsible for delivering. KPIs is a way to measure what are the results, key performance indicators, and we have an agreed upon way that we do things, an operations manual made up of SOPs, checklists, and a dashboard. So those are at a high level what each of those pillars are about and each of the components of the pillars. Let's unpack what strategic direction looks like. Well, what's a vision? Here's a great example of a vision. I have a dream. My 4 children will one day live in a nation where they'll be judged by the color of the skin, but the content of their character. Martin Luther King, very inspiring statement of vision. But what's important about this is while he expressed it in a personal way, he was actually articulating a thought, a feeling, a desire. Every one of these people, 100,000 people sitting at the Washington Monument, he articulated a vision that everybody in that group at that park bought into, supported, and wanted for themselves. So a vision is not just a grand statement of, some highfalutin kind of thing. A vision is something, a picture of the future that everybody can buy into. And Martin Luther King happened to be the person that embraced and held that vision, but he really was articulating the state of the union, the state of what people at the time were looking for. So what's a mission? Well, here's an example of a mission. Most people would probably recognize this. Hey, space, the final frontier. In fact, here's the voice. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Her 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life, new civilization, to boldly go where no man has ever gone before. Well, that's a great example of a mission statement. Where we're going is the vision, how we're going to get there, and why we're going to get there is an example of a mission statement. And there isn't a much better example of a mission statement than what this one is. And so what are values? Well, let me tease you a little bit before diving into this. Why are the 10 Commandments written in stone? They're written in stone because we don't debate them. Thou shalt not kill is a commandment. It is a core value. It is a statement of the standard we're going to hold ourselves to and the standard that we as a group, as a society, as a company agree that we're going to live up to. Zappos was a shoe retailer. And the core point of difference, the core competitive difference that Zappos had compared to everybody else is their family core of values. In case you're thinking, well, that's nice, but who cares? And why is that a big deal? Well, he did 10 years later sell that company to Amazon for $1.2 billion. And he'll tell you the basis of that success is because they had a set of core values that was the cornerstone of how people were going to conduct themselves and how they as a group are going to be held to a standard of what they deem to be excellence. What's a strategic plan? It's a picture of what you're trying to do or where you're going to go in about a year's time. And what is the core purpose of a strategic plan? Well, Lots of people think that the purpose of a strategic plan is to have a grand vision of what we're building together. And yes, that's its stated role. But in fact, the real reason is to get everybody on the same page. A strategic plan is 1% vision and 99% alignment. The purpose of a strategic plan is to get everyone pulling in the same direction with the same goals in mind in a coordinated way. Let me tell you a story of a client I'm presently working with. They're partners. They've been together for many, many years, a decade at least, and things were working well because they basically worked out of each other's hip pocket and they consulted with each other on just about everything. But things changed and 10 years have gone by and one of the two of them wants to step out of the business but continue to be an owner. And now they can't consult every day or be on the same page every day. How do they figure that out? Well, what they agreed is one of the two was going to be the president, but the president was going to be bound by, informed by, constrained by what they agreed as owners about what the strategic plan was going to be. And once they agreed and had their differences resolved and had their vision combined together on the strategic plan, then both owners, both partners knew that the president, which is one of the two of them, was then going to execute against that plan. And it's a classic example of how a strategic plan can help two people that were at odds get aligned on outcomes and the results they were looking for. That's a great example of a strategic plan is 99% alignment and 1% vision. We said the first column in our 3-column approach in how to get the right people doing the right things right is you got to set strategic direction. And ultimately, the bottom line here is how do I get everybody pulling in the same direction, everybody on the same page, agreeing on what results we're expecting to achieve. So that's the grand vision of the business. Well, how does that then get implemented at the level of the individual people? Well, these things need to be in place. And what I'd like to do now is unpack what that means. So what's an org chart? An org chart is basically a way of communicating to everybody how they fit together. Now, when we think of org charts, we think of the traditional model one, the one in the upper left, and it's a very hierarchical model, kind of a military model, bureaucratic model. But nowadays, a lot of other models are actually more appropriate. And you can see that their org charts can look different in lots of different circumstances. Let me tell you about a circumstance where I'm working with a new business owner. This owner was a partner in another firm. That firm got sold and he started his own thing. He was a solopreneur. That was about 2 years ago. Today he has 11 people. And one of the questions he came to me is, how do I think about an org chart? And the model he had in mind was that military or hierarchical kind of way of thinking about models. And yet he was in a software kind of business. And software businesses operate on sprints, 6-day sprints, where project teams to come together and they identify what needs to be done in the next 6-week sprint. When I showed him the example of what org charts can look like, he's immediately grasped that the model he had in mind wasn't appropriate for the kind of business he had. And depending on the circumstance, depending on the needs, org charts can be quite fluid. What an org chart does always do is in every circumstance, it lets people know, how do I fit in? What part of the project is mine? Who am I adjacent to? So that's kind of a top-down view. The other view is from the bottom up. Every individual is like, what am I being held responsible for? What's my position description? And so a position description allows an individual to understand, what am I expected to be able to do? What results am I expected to produce? And how will I know if I'm doing a good job or not? That doesn't entirely depend on me talking to my boss to get some feedback. How do I get some metric, some kind of KPI, some standard that lets me know if I'm delivering? So if you think of org chart as top down, position description allows every individual to know what their piece of the enterprise belongs to them. People need to know if they're on track or not, and that's what performance appraisals are meant to do. They're meant to give people the kind of feedback that helps them understand, are they doing well? Where do they need help? Where their contribution needs to improve? Here's the thing about performance appraisals is often they're kind of a rigid and structural kind of thing, and they're kind of stiff. If that's the kind of performance appraisals you do, you're doing it wrong. Or let me put it a different way. If anything comes up in a performance appraisal, that's a surprise to either you or the person who's the subject of the performance appraisal. You're doing it wrong. A performance appraisal is a formal confirmation of all of the performance kind of discussions you've had on a weekly, monthly, quarterly kind of basis. And the performance appraisal itself is the thing that documents it for the sake of an annual cycle. When we think of performance incentives, we think of people getting bonuses, or we think of people on commission and their pay is entirely related to their performance. I hold a strong opinion that everybody should have some component of their pay that depends on them delivering against an agreed upon standard. Everyone should have performance incentives in their plans. And it can be some part of what they earn is a fixed hourly rate. And you might give someone a starting rate. You might give them a rate that's after 90 days and they've passed their performance, their probationary period. But my argument would be that anything that you do to enhance their pay beyond that is in some way tied to how well they're doing performance-wise. So they may be working for $25 an hour and they want 30, and your performance scheme ought to be designed in a way that the extra $5 they're asking for is produced as a result of them delivering the results that you're asking them for. And they have the capacity in this case to do $32 an hour if they exceed the standard. But if they're not delivering the standard and they're only making 26, that's on them. Now, they may need some help from you, performance, guidance, instruction, training. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if they can't or they won't do it, they can't or won't get the income levels that they need, and then it's probably time for you to make a decision. How do you get everybody to be meeting on the same or agreeing or coordinating their efforts? Well, we've already touched about strategic or annual planning, but how does that translate into day-to-day? Well, there's a rhythm, a structured way communication happens monthly, weekly, and daily. And each of those serves a slightly different purpose, but they all roll up to delivering against the annual plan. And then every year, of course, we reset. We redefine what the future year is going to look like, and then we execute week by week, day by day, month by month through the mechanism of the meeting rhythms. I have a client owned a factory. Daily handle takes about 15 minutes. Everyone who has an area of responsibility that reports to you comes prepared to answer 3 questions. So question number 1 is, what's up? Now, you're not going to tell them what's up. They're going to tell you how they think what's important to them for the day. And your opportunity is to compare what they're describing. How does that fit with what I'm expecting? And if it's a fit, great. If it isn't, I get a chance to identify the gap and modify that so that before I leave and before they leave the meeting, they're clear about what our combined understanding is. The second thing is, where are you stuck? What's holding you back? Maybe you don't have enough parts, or maybe someone's sick. Everyone gets a chance to say, here's the things I need to solve today. And the third thing is, by what measure, by what KPI, how do we know that we're delivering the outcomes that we're looking for? So we know where we're all heading. Everybody knows how it all fits together. But now the question is, how do we execute? How do we implement the things that we're talking about? And that's what the management strategy is for. So everybody's action plan rolls up, so the sum of all those action plans actually delivers the strategic plan. KPIs, which is key performance indicators, everybody's got a measure by which they can judge if they're delivering the results that they're expected to deliver, and that there's an operations manual or a playbook or an agreed methodology on how we're going to execute the things that we're expected to do. What are the steps of a great action plan? Well, first of all, everybody, you got to know where you're going. You got to have measurable goals. There's got to be a list of activities or things that you do to get there. Those activities look like projects, and projects are big schemes that require being broken into component parts or the actionable steps. We need deadlines or accountability or an agreed upon finish line and a finish date in some way, some kind of dashboard or some mechanism that allows us to refer these things in our daily, weekly, and monthly meetings so that everybody can know what's on track, what isn't on track, or put it a different way, what's the green light, what's the yellow light, And what's the red light? If there's 92 things in an organization, 80 of them are working, well, all 80 of those have a green light. They're all fine and need to pay attention. Let's say 10 of them have yellow lights. Well, those are all things that need some further guidance, instruction, some kind of help, and 2 are red. Well, those are extreme circumstances and something needs to change immediately or drastically or importantly. So that's the third column. So when you get the right people doing the right things right, wonderful things happen to you. I have a client who owns a nursery. At the time of this recording, it happens to be spring, which is the super busy time for a nursery, as you can imagine. One day in April, she got to a place at about 2:00 in the afternoon. She said, well, I'm done for the day. Let me go to yoga. And then she stopped and thought, I can't be going to yoga. It's April, for crying out loud. How am I going to go to? And then she realized, you know what? I can go to yoga. Everything's in place. Everything's working. Yeah, there'll be things I have to deal with tomorrow, but I'm not handcuffed to the business. I can go to a yoga session because everybody knows what they're expected to do and everybody knows what good looks like. And when you get those things in place, what'll happen to you is you'll feel less like a firefighter. And to you, that'll make you nervous because you're like, oh my God, how come I'm not getting phoned 100 times a day or emails 100 emails a day? How come it feels like 2:00 on Thursday I can go to yoga? Well, what does that do? You can go to yoga, but you'll also have time to do the big picture things, to architect, to design, to build the business.